Alright, this is the, I guess the next stage in sharpening, and what I've got here is I've got a knife. I don't think you're going to be able to see it, but if I had a nice bright light source off in this direction, be able to shine it, and you can see that I've got a couple rolls in this. So in general the knife is kind of sharp, but with those rolls I want to take it out. That's a little bit too much for the leather belt to do. So what I've done is, this is kind of the next step in sharpening. What do you got to do when you're going a little bit beyond touch-up? You've got something like a little roll that you want to take care of. And what I've put on here is, again, this is the X-weight belt. This is a 600 grit, and it's you know, it's a little bit used, so it's probably a little bit less than that. But this is not very aggressive belt, but it's still enough to smooth out that type of thing. And what I'm going to do is go ahead and try to take those little rolls out. Now, from the previous video, the same thing applies on the angle, especially with a belt that's not that aggressive like this. If you go a little bit too shallow, you might just, you know, shine up this a little bit higher, and it's not that big of a deal. But in general, you'll end up knowing about what angle you want the knife at. I usually like, depends on the steel, but I don't want to go much more than about there on this knife. So I'm going to go ahead and run it a couple pass, and I don't know if you can see how you know, good the edge looks there, but it'll be nice and polished when we're done with it. Now, a lot of times with the 600 grit belt, it won't actually seem sharp when you're done. And if you feel real close, you'll notice, because either on one side or the other there's a wire that has formed. And that's a good thing, but you just need to go a step farther, and I can feel it's rolled over to this side. We're going to knock it off with a leather belt. One other thing to note is, I know that people, that when they use their belt sander, they'll have a cup of water sitting here, and every couple grinds they'll dip it to keep the knife from getting hot. Generally, it's been my experience. I don't know if it's the speed at which I move it across, but I just tend to check it with my finger, and the edge is never even really warm to the touch, so I don't really worry about it. I figure if it's warm enough for me to touch it, it's not too hot to mess up the heat treat. But if you're using a more aggressive belt, if you're moving slow or whatever, and you feel that's getting warm, you might want to dip the blade in water, have some water handy, and wipe it off dry just to keep it from warming up too much. So that was the first step, and it looks like, I know you're not going to be able to see it, but it looks like my rolls are gone, but I've still got that wire on there, so I'm going to have to switch over to my leather belt here. Make sure I get this thing going in the right direction. Set retracting. Up there looks good. And we're just going to do a couple runs here real quick. Not only is that nice and sharp now, but the edge is nice and shiny. So this knife here has a little bit of a thicker edge on it. I don't thin it out too much, so it's not going to be quite as sharp, but it's still nice and sharp, and it'll keep from sliding at a good angle. And it's not going to do as well on the paper because it's not so narrow. I don't like to take the steel down that much because it tends to roll a little bit easy. So we'll see how it goes on the paper though. Not too bad. Didn't do a small curls, but that knife is plenty sharp enough with the way I've sharpened it there.